So I was asked this question, how do I strengthen my vagus nerve? And what the real question is, how can I not be so sensitive, or how can I avoid feeling triggered so often emotionally? Because when we're in a situation where we get emotion triggered, it's your vagus nerve that actually get engaged. So the vagus nerve, for those of you who don't know what that is essentially the nerve that travels from the base of your skull all the way down on either side of your spine, all the way down to your organs. And basically, it's the longest nerve that runs through your body. I believe it's your C10, your cranial nerve 10. And it's called the wandering nerve because it's the longest nerve in your body. And it's directly tied to your sense of survival. So, when you get your butterflies and you feel your stomach tensing, it's your vagus nerve actually engaging and coming all the way down to your organs where your heart's pounding. And so literally when your sense of safety is in question, that engages. And when that, or it becomes overactive, is probably a better way to say that. And then when it calms down, then we say that your parasympathetic nervous system actually turns on, which is your rest and digest. And then when your vagus system becomes overactive, then your sympathetic system goes up, which is basically to hunt and to fight and to flee and so on and so forth. So anyways, those are like the two systems. And essentially, when we go into a fight or flight mode, or work mode or active mode, then the digestive system goes down. And it's actually better to say it doesn't turn off. It's probably better to say that the activity level goes down on one system and the activity level goes up on one system. So like the fight or flight, or the active to the work and to act mode goes down. The sympathetic, the tone is on it, or the activity level on it goes down, and then the activity level on the rest system goes up. And so it's the same thing with your vagal nerve. And so when someone says, how can I strengthen my vagal nerve? The intent here of the question was, how can I live a life where I can be more relaxed and not feel so sensitive and not be so triggered? And that's a really great question. And so if that's actually the case, ironically, at first I want to go away from the question of what to do with the vagus nerve, but rather I want to talk about of the left and the right brain. And so when we get triggered, what happens is your right brain, which is the relational brain, or the part of the brain that looks at the big picture, that shuts off, or again, the activity level on it goes down. And then your left brain, you become left brain dominant. And this gives you a good reason for that. And the reason that actually happens is because the left brain is a problem-solving brain. So when a person gets triggered, then essentially the right brain shuts down, because the way it's viewed is that that when there's danger, especially like say for instance your life is in danger, and these were the times where we were evolving, and these were, like say for instance, these were the times during a caveman, then when a dinosaur is coming after you, or a saber-toothed tiger is coming after you, then you're not thinking about things. You're actually thinking about surviving. And so the relational brain, the activity on it goes down, and then essentially the activity on your left side goes up, and you become left side dominant. And that's actually one of the reasons why when we get triggered, we stop losing curiosity about the other person, and we stop feeling kind towards them or appreciative. But really, actually, that person seems more like a problem and part of the problem, and we become unkind. And also, we lose the ability to make eye contact. And one of the reasons we lose the ability to make eye contact is because when you have eye contact, it connects you emotionally, and that becomes unsafe. You really just want to focus on the problem. Um, now, so this kind of just explains that portion. Now, what's really interesting is that what we don't understand about this mechanism is, most of the time when people explain it, they say that it's because of survival and things like that, and I actually agree with that. But um, you know, I also believe that there's another mechanism about it. Typically, when you have an urgent thing that happens, and it's an urgent thing, but it's within your level of mastery. It's something you've done over and over again, and you're familiar with it. You realize actually you don't get triggered. The only time you get triggered is when it's an unexpected thing, or it's something that's very difficult for you to deal with, or it's a surprise, again, which is an unexpected thing. So you don't know much about it, you don't know how to handle it, or it's difficult to deal with it. So it's one of those things. And when those things happen, one of the left brain, right brain things that actually happens is the right brain is actually responsible for the overall picture, which it means is also it's actually responsible for gathering information. And so it's the part of the brain that ironically looks at the big picture, keeps the history about, your past and your future and your own identity and the identity of the people that you hang out with. And the left brain is the logical brain. And now the left brain has a very interesting thing. The left brain can take a part of reality and then basically look at just that and come up with different scenarios on how to solve it. And that's why problem solving, it's actually such a good problem solving tool. And that's why we call it the analytical part of the brain. But it also means it's out of context. Now, the way typically it works is that the right brain gathers information and then sends it to the left so they can solve the problem better. So a good example of that is so if you're right brained, it actually engages your left side, and if you're left brained, it engages your right side. Now, it's not always the case, but that's actually always true, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily right brained. But your right side engages or stimulates or comes from the left side of the brain, and it's controlled by the left side of the brain, and your right side, the movements on it, are controlled by the left side of the brain. Now, the reason that's actually significant is because, let's say, for instance, you're a right-handed person, you're cutting something with your right, you'll notice that you use your left hand to hold it and stabilize it, but have you ever noticed that when you try and cut something without your left hand, it's exceedingly difficult. You can't quite gauge how to cut it. So what that shows is that your left hand actually doesn't only stabilize it, but gathers information on whatever it is you're cutting. And so it gathers information on whatever you're cutting, and then your right hand, basically, whatever specifically it wants to do, takes all the contextual information and then is able to do its job better. So when you're not triggered, your left brain and your right brain are constantly sending information back and forth. So it sends contextual information to the left brain, and then the left brain, as it's trying to solve its problem, when something's not working, sends what it needs to the right brain, and then the right brain gathers some more contextual information as you adjust your hand, and then you're able to cut better. And so it's actually that interplay that really makes it amazing. And so one of the key things that we need to think about that is that means that when we're in a good space, the left and the right brain are working together is actually the stage of learning and exploration. And so when we have time, that part naturally engages, like the left side and the right side sending information back and forth so we can learn. When it becomes urgent because there is a perception of not enough time and danger, that whole thing goes out the window. And that's actually why it's so that's why the right side shuts down, because it's trying to limit the information that's coming in. And essentially, you'll notice that when you're triggered, you have a lot of assumptions because you stop gathering information. So that's an interesting thing because if that happens, then uh, basically it's meant for situations where a snapshot is all you need, and then you just solve this just a snapshot. Um, and so it's meant for dire situations where you don't have enough time and you need to work on a snapshot. And so in that case, more information can just be overwhelming, and you don't want that. So as you can see, it's not just it's. I feel I want to say it's an oversimplification to say that our brain. Some people will say that it's an old brain, but it's lost its usage because it was meant for survival. But then now we've evolved beyond that point. And I think that's an oversimplification. It is true that it's for survival, but it's just as relevant today because it's a very adaptable brain that's trying to gauge, oh, is this a situation where I should explore? Or is this a situation where I need to just make a quick decision and solve the problem and move on? And so there's a lot of um, uh, nuance that's required and built into that. And I think oftentimes we ignore that. And I think that's part of where the problem is that we ignore that. Uh, so if we really think about this, what be better to say is that whenever we're not well educated, we're more likely to go into a left brain because we feel less capable. So we're more likely to be triggered. And the better educated we are to deal with the situation, the less likely we are likely to be triggered, or even if we are, the more likely we are to keep ourselves in an exploration mode to gather information and to stave off assumption so that we can keep solving the problem better. And that's a significant kind of skill set. And that's what Gong Fu or cultivation is for, because essentially what you're doing is you're taking a human being and you're basically turning the person into an expert in their field so that more or less whatever they come across in their area of expertise, they can handle from an explorative, non-triggered place where they're not limited into the left brain, where they still have access to the whole brain. So if we have this understanding, then we start having a better understanding on how to handle the vagal response better. So now, having said that, I will say this. One thing that I do agree is that modern life is mostly modern life has become so complex that actually learning is very important, where you have the access to your full brain so that you can learn better, because there's such an overwhelm of information. The more your right and left hemisphere work together, the better learner you are, and therefore life is going to be less overwhelming. That's definitely the case. And so in that case, it is true that a lot of the survival responses that we have is not as relevant in our modern day life because, the kind of survival response that we have is mostly for survival. And from that perspective, the kind of survival response for like surviving an animal or a disaster is not as common. And so, that's definitely true. Having said that, what really needs to be updated is actually not so much our brain, because to lose that brain that can have that kind of survival response is not good, because it's not often that we have those kind of situations. But if you have an oncoming car, you don't want to be using your full brain. Basically, you want to be fully in your left brain, have a snapshot moment of seeing the car and just basically moving out of the place of trying to solve that problem. And so it brings that kind of pinpointed focus. However, is outdated is our education system that doesn't understand this, and that doesn't help people to basically how to consciously engage their left and right hemisphere together so that they're working together, and how to handle situations in a calm way so that you can stay expansive and in a way where you're explorative and learning versus where you're triggered and caught up in your survival mode, if you will. And so I think the shift in education to be able to do that is actually more important because we don't want to lose our brain's ability to be in survival mode and limit the information coming in and also be in the explorative mode because that in itself is really good. Uh, so, with that in mind, practically speaking, if you want to, if you will strengthen your vagal system or actually have your vagal system um, uh, be healthy, where it's relaxed and it's properly acting, where your rest and digest system and your healing system is engaged most of the time. And then even when your sympathetic tonus goes up, where it more or less actually stays on. But if you want to do that, you need lots of energy. And the reason you need lots of energy is because one of the reasons your rest and digest system becomes less active or becomes deactivated to a significant extent is because you want all that energy diverted to fight or flight, meaning to being active. And so if that's the case, if you have lots of energy while you're highly active, you can still be relaxed. If you think about it, that's actually sports. Um, you know, you're relaxed, you're having fun. And so play is actually a great example where your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system is well engaged, where you have a good balance between active and rest and digest or healing mode. And so that's an optimal state where your left and right hemisphere is working well, and your sympathetic system is working well, and your parasympathetic system is also working well. So now, from that perspective, what do you do? And that's where we come to what I call in our system the C bars, where basically it's a modernized summary of what the Taoist system or the Tai Chi system teaches, and it comes to C being consciousness, and then B being breathing, and A being alignment, and then R being relaxation, and then S being synchronous movement or slow or synchronous movement. So really, what you do with your mind or your conscious mind or your attention, and then what you do with your breathing, and then what you do with your muscle tonus, whether it's relaxed or tense, and then what you do with your movement. And those are the 5 broad things that really help you control actually your whole system. And when you look at a whole system, it's really good to look at your whole system as an ecosystem of like a whole full system that's working together for to achieve something, and in this case to keep your system balanced. That's probably a good way to say that. And so when you've been in an active mode a long time, your body wants to go to a rest mode. And if you've been in a rest mode long enough, it wants to go to an active mode. And so your system is always seeking balance. That's actually what it's always trying to do. So when you're in pain or when you're discomfort or when you're in fear, that basically means that some part of your system is in balance and is seeking balance. So any kind of negative experience is actually more or less the system seeking that towards balance. And so now your body naturally does that, but by bringing consciousness to it, you can actually help that process along. And so that's what this is about. And so C, consciousness, the first thing in our system that we teach is the third eye. That's actually, talked about in other audios and in other parts. So I'm not going to go into that, but it's basically just bringing awareness to the space behind your forehead, so that you can actually reduce the activity in your prefrontal cortex. So it's not so active. It's just basically learning how to calm that part down. And then when the situation is dire, you learn how to really bring focus to that area. And by bringing focus to the area, you can counteract the intensity of the experience, and you can calm your prefrontal cortex down. So if you do that, then you have an overall when the prefrontal cortex activity goes down, then you're not overthinking things. And as a matter of fact, as you quiet it down, your whole body starts relaxing because it helps you adjust your perception, and it makes you present. And as you become present with what's going on in your body, and you start feeling with what's going on in your body. And that's important because if you can't feel, then you can't make adjustments. So the next comes in breathing, and oftentimes when you've been in a anxiety-provoking situation or fear-provoking situation, your stomach area will be tense. The reason is because the adrenals will release into your stomach area, and then it will shut down your stomach, and so that's why your stomach tenses. And then your vagal nervous system, as we talked about, engages, and then you start having butterflies, and your heart starts beating. Why? Because it wants your heart to pump so that you have enough blood pumping through your arms and your whole system so you can survive. And that's an extensive system activity. And so because of that, when you breathe, what it does is that it actually, and it needs to be specifically pressurized breathing. Pressurized breathing increases the pressure of your whole system and actually has an effect of securing your spine down. And so it presses up against your spine, and so therefore it actually reduces your nerve impulses to your brain. And so it has a calming effect, and when it happens, it actually reduces and lowers. So like if you hold your breath, it increases the pressure, so it reduces your heart rate. And when the heart rate comes down, you calm down because essentially you're telling your brain that the danger response is going down. And then as you actually breathe, it also moves your diaphragm, and that starts opening your stomach again. And then it starts creating movement and a kind of a signal and a massage in your vagal system. And as the diaphragm moves, it moves your pelvic diaphragm and your diaphragm that's right below your lung, and then it actually also engages the diaphragm that's right below your throat. And as it activates, it creates an overall calming effect of your system. So the breathing, the pressurized breathing, along with the third eye, all of a sudden now relaxes or starts relaxing your whole system. Now, the interesting thing here is that by doing the third eye first, you bring awareness, and you can start bringing some more pressure into the areas that are more active. And so that's one of the reasons why awareness is so important, because let's say, for instance, you need more pressure in your lower abdominal area, then you can do that. Or if you need it more in your stomach area, you can do that. If you need it more in your upper chest area because you're feeling anxious, you can do that. And so awareness is really what's important. So now, as you breathe, then the other thing you can do is you can actually tense your muscles. Like you can tense the areas of the body that's actually feeling tense. And so here's the irony. When a part of the body is tensing, the tonus is up, the muscle tonus is up. And as you tense that area, actually, you need to tense it more than it's actually naturally tensing. And so when you do that, you regain the control because it tensed unconsciously, and when you consciously tense it, then it regains the control. And then as you relax, as you exhale and as you relax, that muscle actually can relax. So unless you know how to tense your muscles, you don't actually have conscious control over your tension level, which is interesting. So when people just tell you to relax, you'll find that it's near impossible to relax. If anything, you get tenser. Ironically, according to Tai Chi principles, if you want something, if you want to go up, you need to go down. If you need to go forward, you need to go back. If you want to go back, you need to go forward, and so on and so forth. So if you want to relax, you need to tense, which is counterintuitive. But so you tense. And then as you relax, movement naturally sets in, and you'll notice that the part of your body that's caught up, that has fear, is not moving. And so you need to start bringing movement into that area, and that's where the movement comes in. And when the movement is synchronous, meaning it synchronizes from through all your joints where they're moving together, that's when you're at the most optimal state. So now, uh, there's actually a lot more science in terms of your musculature and the muscle tonus and how that works, and also in relation to movement and how they relate to your organs. But this is kind of like a general idea as to how cultivation can have a significant impact in a person being able to regulate their system, because it's a whole ecosystem, and be able to handle their vagal nervous system better. Now, the things that I mentioned are really just very rudimentary, simple tools. And really, they're visualization tools that directly allow a person to link up their right and the left hemisphere, such as, about a third of your brain is like your visual system. So you'll notice that, if you had a triggering experience, the ideal experience is in your left eye oftentimes, and the actual thing that happened that you didn't want to happen is actually in your right eye. And what you do is you actually imagine that you take out what's in your left eye into your left hand, and you put it in your palm, and then you imagine that what's in your right eye, you put it in your right palm, and then you basically go and smear it on the other side of the hemisphere. So whatever you took out from the left eye, which is in your left hand, you smear it onto your right hemisphere of the brain, and whatever was in your right eye, you take out and you put in your right palm, and then you smear it onto your left hemisphere. And when you do that, you'll feel the brain relaxing and your whole system relaxing, and the brain starts to communicate again. And it's kind of interesting because whenever you engage your visual system, you engage your whole brain. So that very act actually starts integrating the two brains. And by speaking this visual language, you're basically helping directly communicate with your autonomic system, because that's actually one of the most effective ways to communicate with your autonomic system, which is your unconscious. So those are like some tools, and there's a lot more tools for each of the C bars, the consciousness. So this was an example for your conscious act of how to consciously bring about some of these integrations. And I gave an example of how to do the third eye and breathe and tense or relax and move. But really, each one of these things have systems. But this kind of explains how the overall system works and gives a person an idea of how they could actually strengthen, if you will, their vagal system. So hopefully that was helpful and you enjoyed it. Thank you.